It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon in an ordinary middle school classroom. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting long golden streaks across the room. The air smelled faintly of chalk dust and old textbooks. Students sat at their desks, some doodling absent-mindedly, others whispering to their friends, while Mr. Peterson stood at the front of the class with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall man with thinning gray hair and glasses perched on the edge of his nose. His voice carried authority but also kindness as he addressed the 8th graders. "All right, everyone," Mr. Peterson began, tapping the whiteboard with a marker. "Today, instead of diving straight into our lesson about presidential legacies, let's try something different. I want each of you to share a story, something interesting or unusual that you've heard from your family members about American history. It doesn't have to be famous or even true, just something memorable." The students groaned collectively, though not too loudly. They knew better than to push their teacher's patience. A few kids raised their eyebrows at one another, silently wondering who would go first. Mr. Peterson scanned the room, pointing randomly at Sarah Miller. "Sarah, why don't you start us off?" Sarah hesitated for a moment before shrugging. "Well, my grandma always says she met Eleanor Roosevelt once when she was little. She said Eleanor gave her a cookie and told her to never stop asking questions." A few polite nods followed, and someone muttered, "Cool." Then it was Jake Bennett's turn. Jake leaned forward eagerly, grinning. "My dad claims his uncle punched Al Capone in the face during Prohibition. He got away because no one could prove it was him." This earned a round of laughter, and Mr. Peterson chuckled too. "That's quite the family legend," he said. "Who's next?" His eyes landed on Billy Carter, who immediately sank lower into his chair. Billy wasn't exactly shy. He simply preferred staying unnoticed. He had messy brown hair and wore clothes slightly too big for his lanky frame. Billy glanced around nervously, hoping someone else might volunteer instead. But when Mr. Peterson called his name again, louder this time, there was no escaping. With a deep sigh, Billy stood up slowly, clutching the edge of his desk like it might anchor him to safety. Billy started, his voice barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat and tried again. "My grandpa told me a story about how he saved the president's life, with help from Chuck Norris." For a brief second, the room fell silent. Then, like a dam bursting, laughter erupted all around. Some students clapped their hands over their mouths to stifle giggles while others doubled over in their seats, tears streaming down their faces. Even Mr. Peterson couldn't resist joining in, shaking his head with an amused smile. "Chuck Norris?" Mr. Peterson repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Really, Billy? That sounds like one of those internet jokes where Chuck Norris kicks down doors and saves the world single-handedly." Billy's cheeks turned bright red, and he shifted uncomfortably. I'm serious," he stammered, looking down at his shoes. "My grandpa swears it happened. He used to work for the Secret Service, and Chuck Norris actually helped him stop an attack on President Reagan." The laughter only grew louder. Someone shouted, "Yeah, right, what's next, aliens?" Another chimed in. "Did Chuck Norris roundhouse kick the bad guys?" Billy felt his stomach twist into knots. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that his grandpa wasn't making things up, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he mumbled, "Never mind," and slumped back into his seat, wishing he could disappear entirely. Mr. Peterson eventually calmed the class down, though his expression remained skeptical. Okay, let's move on," he said, turning toward the board. "Next person." But deep inside, he couldn't shake the image of Billy's defeated posture. Something about the boy's earnestness nagged at him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Later that evening, Mr. Peterson sat in his small, dimly lit apartment grading papers. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the room as he scribbled notes on a student's essay. His mind kept drifting back to Billy's story. The boy's flushed face and the awkward silence that followed the laughter. He couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, he had been too quick to dismiss it. As he flipped through another paper, there was a knock at the door. Startled, Mr. Peterson glanced up from his desk. Who could be visiting him at this hour? He set down his pen and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. Standing outside were two men, one older, with white hair and a kind smile, and the other, well, the other was unmistakable. Even in the dim hallway light, Mr. Peterson recognized the rugged features and confident stance of Chuck Norris. Mr. Peterson blinked hard, thinking his eyes might be playing tricks on him. But when he opened the door, both men were still there, patiently waiting. The older man stepped forward first, extending his hand. "Good evening, Mr. Peterson," he said warmly. "I'm Harold Carter, Billy's grandfather." Mr. Peterson shook the man's hand automatically, still staring at Chuck Norris in disbelief. Hi," he managed to say, his voice cracking. "Slightly." "Is this real?" Chuck grinned, folding his arms across his chest. "As real as it gets," he replied with a chuckle. "We thought we'd stop by to clear up a little misunderstanding." Harold nodded, his expression serious, but gentle. "You see, Mr. Peterson, Billy told you a story today about how I supposedly saved President Reagan's life with some help from my friend here." He gestured toward Chuck, who gave a slight bow. "And while it may sound far-fetched, it's actually true. We think you deserve to know the whole version." Mr. Peterson felt his cheeks grow warm. He motioned for them to come inside, closing the door behind them. "Please, sit down," he offered, gesturing to the modest living room. The three men settled into chairs, and Mr. Peterson poured each of them a glass of water from the kitchen. As they sipped quietly, Harold began to speak. "It all started back in 1981, Harold explained, leaning forward. "I was working as a Secret Service agent assigned to protect President Reagan during one of his trips to Los Angeles. Everything seemed routine until we received intelligence about a potential threat along the motorcade route." Mr. Peterson listened intently, his skepticism slowly melting away. Harold continued, describing how they discovered a suspicious package near the planned path. "At first, none of us knew what it was. A bomb, maybe, or just a harmless box. But something about it didn't feel right. That's when I decided to investigate further." Chuck leaned in, picking up the story where Harold left off. "I happened to be training nearby that day," he said matter-of-factly. "When I saw the commotion, I figured I could lend a hand. Harold spotted me and waved me over. Together, we assessed the situation and realized the device was rigged to explode." Mr. Peterson's jaw dropped. "You mean, you really disarmed a bomb?" he asked, incredulous. Harold nodded. "With Chuck's expertise and quick thinking, we managed to neutralize the threat before anyone got hurt. It wasn't easy, but teamwork made all the difference." Chuck smiled modestly. "Let's just say it was one of those moments where preparation meets opportunity," he added. "And thankfully, everything turned out okay." For several minutes, Mr. Peterson sat in stunned silence. All the laughter from earlier that day now felt hollow, even cruel. He rubbed his temples, trying to process what he'd just heard. I don't know what to say," he admitted finally. "I owe Billy an apology, and you both, honestly. I never should have doubted him." Harold placed a reassuring hand on Mr. Peterson's shoulder. "It's understandable to be skeptical," he said kindly. "But sometimes the most unbelievable stories hold the deepest truths. Just remember that next time someone shares something extraordinary." Chuck stood up, signaling that their visit was coming to an end. "Take care of those kids, Mr. Peterson," he advised with a firm handshake. "They're counting on you to guide them, not just academically, but emotionally too." As the two men left, Mr. Peterson closed the door behind them, feeling a mix of emotions, guilt, awe, and determination. For the rest of the night, he couldn't stop thinking about Billy and the lesson he'd learned. Tomorrow, he vowed, would be different. The next morning, Mr. Peterson arrived at school earlier than usual. He couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he'd had with Harold Carter and Chuck Norris the night before. The story they shared was incredible, almost too incredible to believe. But something about their sincerity convinced him it was true. More importantly, he realized how wrong he had been to laugh at Billy in front of the entire class. As he prepared for the day, Mr. Peterson made a decision. Today would be different. He wasn't just going to apologize to Billy. He was going to make sure everyone understood the importance of listening without judgment. When the bell rang and students filed into the classroom, Mr. Peterson stood at the front, his expression unusually serious. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice steady but warm. "Before we dive into today's lesson, I need to address something important." The students exchanged curious glances. They weren't used to seeing their teacher act so solemn. Some leaned forward in their seats, intrigued by what might come next. "Yesterday, one of your classmates shared a story that I dismissed too quickly," Mr. Peterson continued, looking directly at Billy. "I want to apologize for that, for laughing and not taking it seriously. That wasn't fair to Billy or to the story itself." Billy looked up, surprised. His face flushed slightly as all eyes turned toward him. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Mr. Peterson gestured for Billy to stand. "Billy, I'd like you to tell the story again. But this time, everyone will listen carefully without interruptions or laughter. Deal?" The room fell silent. Slowly, Billy nodded and stood up. His hands trembled a little as he gripped the edge of his desk, but he took a deep breath and began speaking. "My grandpa worked for the Secret Service during President Reagan's term. One day, there was a bomb planted along the president's motorcade route. My grandpa found it, but he couldn't disarm it alone. So, Chuck Norris helped him." This time, no one laughed. Instead, the students listened intently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. Billy spoke more confidently now, encouraged by the respectful silence. They worked together to stop the bomb from exploding. If they hadn't acted fast, the president could have been hurt, or worse. When Billy finished, the room remained quiet for a few seconds. Then someone clapped. Another student joined in, and soon the whole class was applauding. Billy smiled shyly, clearly relieved and proud. After the applause died down, Mr. Peterson stepped forward. "Thank you, Billy," he said warmly. "That was an amazing story, and one we should all remember. Sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when people work together and refuse to give up." Later that afternoon, after school let out, Billy lingered behind in the classroom. He wanted to thank Mr. Peterson for giving him another chance to share his story. As he approached the teacher's desk, however, he noticed two familiar figures standing near the window. "Grandpa," Billy exclaimed, rushing over to hug Harold Carter. Beside him stood Chuck Norris, who grinned and gave Billy a thumbs up. "I thought you might like a surprise visit," Harold said, ruffling Billy's hair affectionately. "We wanted to see how things went today." "It was great," Billy replied enthusiastically. Everyone listened and nobody laughed. Even Mr. Peterson apologized. Chuck knelt down to Billy's level, his eyes twinkling with kindness. "You did good, kid," he said. "Standing up for yourself isn't always easy, but you handled it like a pro. Remember, courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing the right thing even when you're scared." Billy beamed, feeling a surge of pride. For once, he didn't feel like the awkward, overlooked boy in class. He felt like a hero. Meanwhile, Mr. Peterson watched the scene unfold with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. Seeing Billy interact with his grandfather and Chuck Norris reminded him of why he became a teacher in the first place: to inspire and support young minds. He walked over to join them, extending his hand to Harold. "Thank you for coming yesterday," he said sincerely. "And thank you for sharing your story. It's taught me and my students a valuable lesson." Harold shook his hand firmly. "It's our pleasure," he replied. "Stories like these remind us that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about people, their struggles, their bravery, and their willingness to make a difference." Chuck added, "And sometimes those stories are closer to home than we realize. Keep encouraging these kids to dream big and believe in themselves, Mr. Peterson. You never know what they're capable of." With that, Harold and Chuck said their goodbyes, leaving Mr. Peterson and Billy alone in the classroom. As they watched the two men walk away, Billy turned to his teacher. "Do you think anyone will ever believe me if I tell them Chuck Norris visited our school?" Mr. Peterson chuckled softly. "Honestly, probably not, but that's okay. What matters is that you know it happened. and that you had the courage to share your story." Billy nodded, smiling. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly understood. The following day, word spread quickly among the students about Billy's story. By lunchtime, nearly everyone in the school knew that Billy Carter had claimed his grandfather saved President Reagan with help from Chuck Norris, and that Mr. Peterson had apologized for laughing it off. Some kids still found it hard to believe, but others were curious and wanted to hear more. What no one expected, however, was what happened after school let out. Just as the final bell rang and students began packing up their bags, a commotion erupted near the front entrance of the building. A crowd of students gathered around someone standing in the doorway, craning their necks to get a better look. "Is that?" one student whispered, wide-eyed. "It can't be," another replied, shaking their head in disbelief. Standing there, calm and collected, was none other than Chuck Norris himself. Beside him was Harold Carter, Billy's grandfather, who waved warmly at the stunned onlookers. The news traveled like wildfire through the hallways. "Chuck Norris is here." Within minutes, the entire student body had flooded into the main lobby, eager to catch a glimpse of the legendary martial artist and actor. Mr. Peterson hurried over, flustered but thrilled. "Mr. Norris, Mr. Carter, what brings you back so soon?" he asked, trying to keep his composure despite the chaos unfolding around them. "We thought we'd drop by to say hello," Harold said with a chuckle, clearly amused by the excitement they'd caused. "And maybe share a few words with the kids?" Chuck nodded, stepping forward to address the sea of young faces staring up at him. "Hello, everyone," he began, his voice deep and reassuring. "I know some of you might think yesterday's story sounds unbelievable, but let me tell you something. Sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Your friend Billy had the courage to share something personal, even when he knew people might not believe him. That takes guts. And I'm here today to remind all of you that bravery isn't just about fighting bad guys or saving presidents. It's also about standing up for yourself, speaking your mind, and believing in your own worth." The students listened intently, hanging on every word. Even the usually rowdy kids stood quietly, captivated by Chuck's presence and wisdom. He went on to talk about perseverance, kindness, and the importance of supporting one another. "Never underestimate the power of a single act of courage," he said. "Whether it's disarming a bomb or simply raising your hand in class to speak your truth, those moments matter. They shape who you are and who you'll become." When Chuck finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Students cheered and clapped enthusiastically, many of them shouting questions or asking for autographs. Chuck graciously obliged, signing notebooks, backpacks, and even a few arms, while Harold smiled proudly beside him. Billy, meanwhile, felt like he was living in a dream. Seeing Chuck Norris surrounded by his classmates, treating everyone with respect and humility, filled him with pride. For once, he wasn't the awkward kid sitting in the back of the classroom. He was the center of attention, not because he sought it, but because he had shared something extraordinary. As the crowd began to thin out, Chuck approached Billy and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did great, kiddo," he said with a warm smile. "Remember this feeling, the confidence you've gained from telling your story. Carry it with you wherever you go." Billy nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Nearby, Mr. Peterson watched the scene unfold, marveling at how much had changed in just 2 days. What started as an embarrassing moment in class had turned into a lesson none of them would ever forget. Later that evening, as Billy sat at home reflecting on everything that had happened, he realized something important. It wasn't just about the story itself. It was about finding the courage to share it and discovering that people would listen if given the chance. For the first time in a long while, Billy felt proud of who he was and hopeful about who he could become. In the weeks that followed Chuck Norris's surprise visit to the school, life began to change for Billy Carter and for everyone else at the middle school. The story of Harold Carter and Chuck Norris saving President Reagan became a legend, within the halls passed down from one student to the next like a cherished piece of history. It wasn't just gossip or idle chatter. It was a reminder of something bigger: courage, truth, and the importance of believing in others. For Billy, the transformation was profound. Before all this, he had been content to fade into the background, avoiding attention whenever possible. But now, he carried himself differently. He walked with his head held higher, participated more confidently in class discussions, and even started joining conversations during lunch breaks. His classmates noticed the shift too. Instead of teasing him or ignoring him, they began seeking him out, eager to hear more about his grandfather's adventures, or just to chat with the kid who'd brought Chuck Norris to their school. One day during recess, Billy found himself surrounded by a group of kids sitting on the grass under a large oak tree. "So, do you think your grandpa has any other cool stories?" asked Mia Rodriguez, a girl from his math class. She had always been quiet before, but seemed drawn to Billy's newfound confidence. Billy smiled, brushing a strand of hair out of his eyes. "Oh yeah," he replied. "He talks about working with the Secret Service all the time. There's this one story where he chased a guy through downtown LA. It's wild." "Wait, really?" Another boy chimed in, leaning closer. "You should totally tell us about it sometime." Billy nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. For once, he didn't feel like an outsider. These were his friends now, or at least they were starting to feel like it. Meanwhile, Mr. Peterson also experienced a shift in perspective. Teaching wasn't just about facts and figures anymore. It was about fostering empathy, understanding, and trust. He made a conscious effort to create space in his lessons for students to share their own experiences and ideas without fear of ridicule. Whether it was a family anecdote, a personal goal, or even a silly dream, Mr. Peterson encouraged them to speak up and support one another. During one particularly memorable class, Mr. Peterson introduced a new activity. "Today we're going to talk about heroes," he announced, writing the word on the whiteboard. "Not just superheroes like in movies, but real-life heroes. People who inspire us because of their actions, their values, or the way they treat others." Hands shot up across the room as students eagerly volunteered examples. Some mentioned historical figures like Martin Luther King Jr. or Harriet Tubman. Others talked about family members, a brave older sibling, a hard-working parent, or a kind grandparent. When it came time for Billy to share, he didn't hesitate. "My hero is my grandpa," Billy said, standing tall. "He's not famous or anything, but he's always done what's right, even when it's hard. And he taught me that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what needs to be done no matter how scared you are." The class erupted into applause, and Billy sat down with a grin, feeling proud of himself. Mr. Peterson beamed, knowing that moments like these were what teaching was truly about. Harold Carter, meanwhile, basked in the joy of seeing his grandson come into his own. After years of watching Billy struggle to fit in, Harold felt immense pride knowing that his stories had given the boy a sense of purpose. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Harold turned to Billy with a thoughtful expression. "You know," Harold began, "I never thought much about those old stories until recently. To me, they were just memories, things I lived through and moved past. But hearing you tell them, well, it makes me realize how powerful stories can be. They connect us, to each other, to our pasts, and to ourselves." Billy nodded, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. "I guess I never realized how important it was to share them," he admitted. "But now I get it. Stories make people believe in themselves, in each other, and sometimes in things they wouldn't have thought possible." Harold patted Billy's shoulder affectionately. "That's exactly right, son. Keep sharing your stories and keep believing in yourself. You've got a lot to offer the world." Chuck Norris stayed in touch with the family, sending occasional notes of encouragement and even visiting again a few months later. During his second visit, he spent time mentoring some of the students who expressed interest in martial arts or self-defense. He emphasized discipline, respect, and perseverance, leaving a lasting impression on everyone he met. On the day of his departure, Chuck pulled Billy aside for a private moment. "You're doing great, kid," he said with a firm handshake. Keep standing tall and speaking your truth. The world needs more people like you. Billy swallowed hard, trying to hold back tears. Thank you, Mr. Norris, he managed to say. For everything. Chuck smiled warmly. Anytime, Billy. Anytime. As the months went by, the impact of those events continued to ripple through the school and beyond. Students became more supportive of one another. Teachers embraced storytelling as a tool for connection, and Billy blossomed into a confident young man unafraid to stand out. What had started as a simple classroom moment had grown into something far greater, a testament to the power of courage, belief, and community. Months had passed since the day Chuck Norris visited Billy's school, but the effects of that unforgettable event lingered like ripples in a pond. Life continued as usual for most people, yet subtle changes could be seen everywhere. In the way students interacted with one another, in the lessons taught by Mr. Peterson, and especially in how Billy carried himself. Billy was no longer the quiet boy who tried to blend into the background. He became someone his classmates looked up to, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he embodied qualities they admired: courage, honesty, and kindness. His newfound confidence inspired others to step out of their own comfort zones, too. Kids who once hesitated to raise their hands in class now spoke up without fear. Even small acts of bravery, like admitting mistakes or helping a struggling peer, became more common around the school. One afternoon, during a special assembly, Mr. Peterson decided to honor Billy publicly. Standing at the podium in front of the entire student body, he cleared his throat and began. Today, I want to recognize someone who has reminded us all of an important lesson: the power of believing in ourselves and each other. This young man shared a story that many doubted, but instead of giving up, he stood firm. And when given the chance, he proved that truth can be stranger and more inspiring than fiction. The audience erupted into applause as Billy stepped forward, blushing furiously but smiling proudly. Mr. Peterson handed him a certificate labeled Courage Award, which drew even louder cheers from the crowd. As Billy returned to his seat, several students patted him on the back or whispered congratulations. For the rest of the day, he felt like he was walking on air. At home, Harold Carter watched his grandson grow with pride. The changes in Billy weren't just external, they ran deep. He noticed how Billy spent hours reading books about history, eager to learn more about the world and its heroes. Sometimes Billy would sit beside Harold on the couch, asking questions about his days in the Secret Service. These conversations brought both of them immense joy, strengthening their bond even further. One evening, as they flipped through old photo albums together, Harold paused at a picture of himself standing beside President Reagan. "You know," Harold said thoughtfully, "I used to think my days of making a difference were over. But seeing what you've done, well, it makes me realize that our stories don't end when we stop telling them. They live on through the people we share them with." Billy nodded, tracing the edges of the photograph with his finger. "I guess that means I should keep sharing your stories and maybe start telling some of my own someday." Harold chuckled warmly. "That's the spirit, son. You never know whose life you might touch." Chuck Norris remained a guiding presence in Billy's life, though mostly from afar. Every so often he'd send a letter or call to check in, always offering words of encouragement. In one such note, Chuck wrote, "Billy, remember that being brave isn't about never feeling afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. Keep shining your light, and don't let anyone dim it." These messages meant the world to Billy, reinforcing everything he'd learned over the past months. With each passing day, he grew more determined to live up to the example set by his grandfather and Chuck Norris. As graduation approached, the 8th grade class prepared for their final yearbook signing. Students filled pages with inside jokes, heartfelt messages, and promises to stay in touch. When Billy opened his yearbook, he found countless notes praising his bravery and thanking him for inspiring others. One message stood out among the rest. It was from Mr. Peterson. "Billy," the note read, "you taught us all an invaluable lesson this year, that extraordinary things happen when ordinary people refuse to give up. Never forget that your voice matters and your courage can change the world." Wishing you nothing but success in the future." Tears welled up in Billy's eyes as he read the words. He realized then that the impact of his story extended far beyond himself. It had touched everyone who heard it. Years later, as Billy graduated high school and prepared to attend college, he reflected on how far he'd come. What started as an embarrassing moment in middle school had transformed into a journey of self-discovery and growth. He still cherished the memories of his grandfather's tales and Chuck Norris's visits, knowing they had shaped him into the person he was today. On the night before he left for college, Billy sat on the porch with Harold, watching the stars twinkle in the sky. "Grandpa," he said softly, "do you think I'll ever have stories like yours someday?" Harold smiled, placing a hand on Billy's shoulder. "You already do, son. And if you keep following your heart, there will be plenty more to come." With those words echoing in his mind, Billy stepped onto the path ahead, ready to write his own chapter in the story of life.